What's up? Welcome back. In this episode, we're going to talk about the 3 tools that you have for passing data with your payment link through the payment process for your customer so that you can either keep track of what campaign they're in or what user it's for. And those 3 tools are, number 1, the client reference ID. This is a query string parameter that you can add directly to the payment link. It could be any custom ID. We'll look at how to do that. Number 2, you can pass UTM params. So you're tracking maybe what campaign they were in, or perhaps like what source they came from. Did they come from Twitter or another social media, or maybe one of your, your email campaigns? So you can embed those UTM params. And finally, we'll look at how you can update your confirmation page and your redirect for a payment link to include the checkout session ID. And that ID will have reference to the checkout session and all of the order details. Okay, so let's get started by creating a brand new payment link. I'm in the Stripe dashboard. You can head over to stripe.com and sign up for an account if you don't already have one. We're going to use this product called a book. It's $10 USD one time, and this is going to be a very basic payment link. We're not going to enable any other advanced options, and we're just going to create this simple payment link with a single product for $10. Now that we have this link, we can copy it. And if we go directly to the link with no query string parameters at all, you'll notice that we're brought to this checkout page and we're prompted and asked to pay this $10. I'm already authenticated with Link, so I can just pay one time and click this button. It's going to complete the purchase. Now, at this point, we haven't actually passed through any data, so we don't know anything about where the person found this link or any reference back to the original user. And we just get this thank you page, and we would need to go into our Stripe dashboard and look and see, try to figure out who bought this book that we just sold. An alternative is to add a query string parameter. The first we're going to add is a client underscore reference underscore ID. Now this could be any ID that ties the session back to your existing user. So this might be sort of like 1 or 9,000 or whatever. You might have some UUID in your database that relates back to your user. But I'm just going to put my customer ID. That's going to be the client reference ID. Notice that I'm putting this after the query string, and this is a query string parameter. If I wanted more query string parameters, I would separate those with an ampersand. So this is our first sort of key and value pair that we're adding into the query string. Now, again, we're redirected through checkout. The experience looks very similar. The customer is not going to see anything different. However, now that we have completed the process, what we could do is take the ID of the checkout session, which conveniently happens to be in the URL there, and we could come back over and look at our logs for the developer. And actually, in fact, let's look at the events, and we'll notice that there was a webhook event that fired called checkout session completed. So we could build automations inside of Zapier or other tools for handling no code fulfillment, where we're going to listen for this webhook event. And you'll notice that the client reference ID is embedded inside of the checkout session object. Similarly, if you have a server running that's listening for these webhook events, you can retrieve the checkout session. So I could say maybe Stripe checkout sessions retrieve, and here I'm going to pass in that checkout session ID that I got back. And here I can refetch and see the client reference ID. So this is the client reference ID. Now you might be wondering, where do I get that checkout session ID? So let's talk about that next. So by default, this checkout session object is created for you sort of under the hood by payment links. And by default, there's really no way to access that. So what we need to do is we have to go inside of our configuration for our payment link. So we're going to go back to our payment link here, and we're going to say edit. And on our confirmation page, what we want to do is say we want to redirect customers to your website. So I'm going to say https cjav.dev, and that means that after a customer completes the flow, they're going to be redirected to this page instead of showing them sort of this thank you page here after they complete the process. But if you click on this little more information hover, you'll notice that you can include the checkout session in the redirect URL. That means that this URL that we're defining here can have its own sort of checkout session embedded in it. Now we can embed that any way we want. We just have to put in the open curly brace and then in all caps checkout underscore session underscore ID and then close curly brace. And typically folks will put this inside of the query string, but it could be in the path, it could be elsewhere. So you might say this is the ID equals, or maybe checkout checkout session ID equals this. So now when we redirect this checkout session ID, this is right now hard coded into this redirect URL that we're setting. This will be replaced with that ID for the checkout session so that on our thank you page, we can retrieve the checkout session and display whatever we want about the checkout session. So I'm gonna say update the link here. Let's copy it. We'll go through one more time. So we're gonna click on that payment link. We're redirected through. Now when we click on pay, instead of seeing that default thank you page, we're gonna be redirected to our brand new redirect URL. So now we are redirected to cjav.dev/ and now we have our checkout session ID query string parameter, and that includes the ID of the checkout session. So if we wanted to, we could implement a page here that retrieves this checkout session. So here we go. So we've got our checkout session ID. We copied it from the URL. We're pasting it in here. That's the same. Now when we hit enter, you'll notice that because we did not include a client reference ID, the client reference ID is null. So we could sort of combine those two concepts, right? So let's grab our payment link. We're going to copy it and say that our client reference ID is my customer ID. And now when we go through the checkout flow, we're redirected back to our new page. We can grab that checkout session ID and we can say Stripe checkout sessions retrieve, paste in our checkout session ID. And now we should see our client reference ID is set to my customer ID. So now what we've got going on is we have two tools. We have our client reference ID that we're going to set as the query string parameter on the payment link before we redirect. And then second, we have this checkout session ID that's embedded in the URL that the customer is ultimately redirected to. Now, is there something that we can add that will pass through in both cases? And the answer is yes. So we're going to use UTM params for that. So if you go over to the documentation, you can search for this track campaigns using UTM params. And there are 5 different parameters that are supported. So UTM source, content, medium, term, and campaign. So let's grab this UTM source and play around with this for a second. So we're going to say UTM source, maybe the source was Twitter, and the UTM campaign, maybe it was for Hacktoberfest or something, I don't know. And then when we hit enter, this UTM source and campaign will be passed all the way through to our redirect URL. So now when we click on pay, what we can do is associate these checkout sessions and sort of confirmations back to a specific source and campaign. So now we can see that in the query string, we have our UTM source of Twitter and the UTM campaign of Hacktoberfest. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully this was helpful. Please let us know in the comments below if you like videos like this one, and also let us know how you're using payment links. We'd love to know your use case and if there's anything missing from the API that you'd like to see. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.